The message arrived at exactly 2:30 in the morning, just as the cabin lights dimmed and the city lights of Kuto town disappeared below the clouds. The subject line on the email read, "Termination notice, effective immediately." At first, Ruth thought her phone had glitched. She blinked a few times, thinking the screen hadn't fully loaded. But no, it was all there. Name, her position, and the sentence that made her chest feel like it had been pierced. Your employment with Coratec has been terminated effective immediately. No call. No meeting. Not even a thank you. Just this cold final message. And the sender? Mr. Emmanuel, the CEO himself, the same man who had looked her in the eye just 2 weeks earlier and said, "You're the only one I trust to finish this deal." Ruth looked around the airplane cabin. Everyone else in business class was asleep, resting in their cozy pods, some with eye masks, others with wine glasses still half full. She was the only one awake, alone with the quiet hum of the jet engines and a silence that now felt louder than anything she'd ever heard. Days. 3 countries. Lagos for the setup, Nairobi for the agreements, and Kuto town for the final signature. She hadn't just worked on the deal, she built it from the ground up. It was worth over 1.5 billion naira spread across 7 years. And now, just like that, they had cut her off. No warning. No explanation. Just an email that threw her into the cold. At first, Ruth didn't feel anger. Not yet. Only shock. Like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet mid-step. She stared at her laptop, frozen. After a minute, she reached under her seat and pulled out a second computer. Matte black. No logo. No company sticker. Just hers. No one at Coratec even knew it existed. She opened it slowly, fingers steady despite her heart racing. She typed in her password and the screen lit up. A small smile appeared on her face. They thought this was the end of her story. They didn't know she had already begun writing another one, 3 weeks before the betrayal even started. She remembered it clearly. 3 weeks ago, she had stood in that very boardroom on the 27th floor, glass windows stretching to the ceiling, watching senior managers scramble like scared goats. A key client, a tough group from the East, had walked out of a contract negotiation. Legal was panicking. Finance was pointing fingers. Sales was nearly in tears. Ruth didn't wait to be invited. She walked in, picked up the abandoned contract, and rewrote the proposal's heart within 20 minutes. Then she requested a private call with the client's head negotiator. By the next morning, the deal was back, and even bigger than before. That win should have meant something. Instead, it became just another story that people forgot too quickly. They celebrated her in the executive lounge with glasses of sparkling wine. Mr. Emmanuel gave his fake smile and said, "That's the kind of leadership we need." Rumors of a promotion began floating through the hallways. Some whispered that she would soon become vice president of strategy. Ruth didn't get excited. She had heard promises before. She had led big wins before. But this time it felt different, like maybe finally they saw her. She was wrong. A week later, they told her the promotion was under review. And then, nothing. First, Ruth thought maybe it was just a delay. She told herself, maybe human resources is slow. Maybe there's some internal reshuffling. She gave them the benefit of the doubt. But doubt turned into realization one afternoon when she overheard something she was never meant to hear. She had been preparing a client portfolio in a side room during a board luncheon. The sliding door was left slightly open. And through that small gap, she heard laughter. "Ruth is sharp," one board member said. "But let's be honest. When she talks, the men in the room just shut down." Another voice followed. "She's not executive material. She's more of a field type." Field type. The words echoed in her chest. As if all she had done, all the long flights, late nights, negotiations, deals, amounted to nothing more than being a tool they used and shelved. She wasn't being groomed for leadership. She was being contained. Too outspoken. Too effective. Too difficult to manage. And in that moment, standing there with the portfolio she had spent 2 months building, Ruth realized a painful truth. It wasn't about performance. It was about perception. She wasn't a threat because she failed. She was a threat because she succeeded too much. But Ruth didn't argue. She didn't slam the door or storm into the boardroom. Instead, she walked calmly back to her desk, booked another round of international flights, and focused on closing the company's biggest deal. If they wouldn't give her a seat at the table, she would build her own. In silence. In secret. Not for revenge but for clarity. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't shout. It whispers, slowly dripping into your spirit until you're knee-deep in disappointment, wondering how long it's been leaking. A year before all this, there was another incident. One that should have told Ruth everything she needed to know. The CEO's daughter, Sandra Emanuel, had just joined Coratec as a strategic advisor, a title as vague as it was unearned. Sandra had only 2 years of work experience and no background in tech. During a live demo with an international client, she made a terrible error. She triggered an unauthorized data transfer that exposed private information from a sensitive partnership. It should have been a company-wide scandal. Legal panicked. Marketing froze. But Mr. Emanuel made one call to Ruth. "Clean it up," he said quietly over the phone. She didn't know what she was doing. Ruth didn't argue. She worked around the clock, called in every favor she had, and spun the narrative into a minor testing glitch. She even took the press call herself to protect Sandra's name. No one thanked her. No recognition. No credit. But Ruth didn't ask for it. She told herself it was loyalty, that protecting the company meant protecting all of it, even the undeserving. But loyalty, she would learn, rots quickly when it is not returned. 3 days before the fateful trip, Ruth opened the company's shared drive to review the final pitch deck for the Trident deal. She had been shaping that proposal for weeks. Clean slides, sharp numbers, solid structure. But when she opened the file, something changed. The author field no longer showed her name. It read, Sandra Emanuel. Ruth froze. Maybe Sandra had downloaded it and saved over it by accident. But no. As she flipped through the slides, she saw minor edits, layout tweaks, a few rewritten sentences, but the structure was exactly the same. Her work, her vision, her strategy, only now with someone else's name. Ruth sat in her apartment that night, staring at the city lights beyond the window. The slide deck glowed on her screen like a bitter reminder. She didn't message Sandra. She didn't call Mr. Emanuel. She didn't report anything to HR. Because deep down she already knew the outcome. They would brush it off as collaboration. They'd say she was being too sensitive. Emotional. That word always appeared when a woman questioned power. So Ruth did the only thing she knew how to do. She stayed silent and packed her bags for the trip. But silence did not mean it didn't hurt. The pain was quiet, not loud. Crept in slowly. Every time someone praised Sandra for her clear strategy. Every time she recited Ruth's own words like she had thought of them. Ruth remembered all the times she had covered for her. Protected her. Even saved her from scandal. And now Sandra was not just taking her work. She was erasing her entirely. Still Ruth didn't scream. She didn't throw a tantrum. She pivoted. Quietly. Intentionally. Because she had been preparing for this. 6 months before the betrayal, Ruth began building something else. Not because she expected to be fired, but because she had learned that power respects leverage. Not loyalty. Coratec had changed since she joined. It used to be small, hungry, full of ambition. But over time it turned into something else. Politics replaced innovation. Safe players got promoted. Bold thinkers were pushed aside. The best minds were either silenced or driven out. Many were her friends. Some had been mentors. All had quietly begun building something else. Just like Ruth. She called her project Amari, meaning grace in one of the old village dialects. No big announcements. No social media posts. Just a name, a legal document, and a small team of people who believed in what Coratec used to be. Engineers, legal experts, and strategists. All tired of being overlooked. Amari was not revenge. It was a seed. A promise to do business differently. With clarity. With purpose. with people who actually listened to clients. Ruth didn't plan to launch it right away. She was still at Coratec, still building their biggest deal. But she had already drawn her map. The final sign came during a long dinner in Kuto town. Ruth was seated across from Mr. Luis Mata, CEO of one of the 3 major firms involved in the deal. After 3 days of negotiations, the pressure was beginning to lift. Over a glass of wine, Mr. Mata leaned forward and asked, "Ruth, have you ever thought about leading instead of following?" Ruth blinked. "What do you mean?" He smiled. "You speak like someone who built something from the ground up. So why aren't you the one running the company?" She laughed lightly. "Because someone else inherited it." He didn't laugh. He just replied, "Well, if you ever decide to change that, call me." That moment stayed with Ruth. Not because it flattered her, but because it showed her the truth. The clients saw it. They noticed the gap between the one doing the work and the ones collecting the praise. They weren't blind. They could tell who had clarity and who had politics. When Ruth got back to the office, she didn't share what Mr. Mata said. She didn't mention the calls she had started receiving from other partners. She just expanded Amari's scope, called a quiet meeting with her core team, and continued preparing. Her core team included Jenna, a former legal head, Joseph, a systems architect, and Teo, a finance expert, all ex-Coratec professionals, all ready to build again. They didn't use company emails. They met at night in apartments and cafes, using encrypted channels. No one knew. But the plan was forming. While Coratec thought she was just another staff member chasing a deal, Ruth was laying the bricks of something much stronger. A company that would stand on trust, not titles. Back at Coratec, preparations for the Grand Gala were in full swing. The event was meant to celebrate Sandra Emanuel's sudden promotion to Vice President of International Strategy. The irony was bitter. Ruth had built that department from scratch, back when it didn't even exist. She had done it from 3 countries, with nothing but a laptop and a dream. And now she stood under glowing lights, pretending to toast the very woman who had stolen her work, her title, and her credit. Ruth didn't sip her drink. She just smiled. Sandra looked perfect, of course. Hair curled, dress sharp, voice full of practiced warmth. She gave a speech filled with buzzwords she barely understood. Cross-border strategy, economic synergy, future alignment. Ruth stood in the shadow behind her, listening, nodding, watching. Not one word about the deals Ruth had closed. Not one mention of the strategy she wrote. Jenna, who stood nearby, leaned in and whispered, "This is surreal." Ruth just nodded. Surreal was it. The rest of the gala was a blur of false smiles, awkward glances, and glasses clinking over shallow words. Ruth noticed it all. The junior staff she had mentored avoided her gaze. A few gave her quick nods, the kind that said, "I know this isn't right, but I don't want to lose my job." Mr. Emanuel gave his usual speech, praising Sandra's strategic vision, and announcing that she would be shadowing Ruth on the next leg of the Trident deal. Ruth nearly choked. Shadowing her. As if she had agreed to train the same woman who had quietly replaced her. Ruth smiled. Train, practice smile. The kind that hides fire behind grace. The audience clapped. Sandra turned to her, warm and sugary. "I hope we'll have time to go over the structure for the Kuto town pitch. I'm still trying to understand the Nairobi numbers." Ruth responded smoothly, "You should. The clients tend to ask tough questions." Sandra giggled. "I'll just point them to you. You always know what to say." Ruth smiled again, sharper this time. Because she already knew. Sandra wouldn't be on that trip. Ruth had made sure of it. She had booked a second itinerary, one that bypassed the internal travel system. No one at Coratec knew. While they were still thinking she was leaving on Friday, she was already in the air by Wednesday. No assistant. No observers. Just Ruth and her plan. By the time she landed in Nairobi, she hadn't slept properly in 3 nights. But exhaustion didn't matter. What waited for her on the other side of this journey wasn't just a deal. It was something far more important. Clarity and control over her own future. Nairobi was the first test. She sat across from the CTO of Telaxis, one of the 3 major clients. A sharp man with little patience for empty talk. "Everyone promises security," he said. "Why should we believe yours is different?" Ruth didn't blink. She pulled up a technical document she had worked on with engineers 6 weeks prior. The board hadn't even reviewed it yet. She explained every detail. Encryption layers, regional compliance, zero trust structure. When she finished, he didn't smile. He just nodded. "Now I understand why they send you," he said. "The others speak. You understand." After the meeting, as they walked to the car, Ruth spoke carefully. "If there was a leaner company, same technology, but no politics, just delivery, would you consider it?" The man paused, then looked at her quietly. "Something other than Coratec." She didn't answer. He didn't press. But as he got into his car, he looked back and said, "Send the details. Privately." Ruth didn't say anything. But her heart tightened with resolve. The first seed had sprouted. London was next. Euroconnect, the second major partner, had concerns. The legal team, led by Linda Clark, was tough. Ruth respected her. Brexit had made regulations tight, and the standard contracts from Coratec were a mess. Ruth had raised concerns about the wording months ago. No one listened, so she fixed it herself. That night, in a small rented apartment, she rewrote the entire contract using her own template, one developed with Jenna during the quiet planning of Amari. The next morning, Ruth placed the documents on the table in the sleek Euroconnect boardroom. Linda scanned the first page, eyebrows raised. "This isn't Coratec's standard language," she said. Ruth met her eyes. "It's the language that works. Unless you want to waste 3 weeks arguing over red lines." Linda read in silence. Then she asked, "You wrote this?" Ruth nodded. "Yes. Off the record." Linda leaned back and smiled. "If you're ever tired of being on that side of the table, come to mine." The message was clear. Another seed planted. By the time Ruth arrived in Kuto town, her energy was running low. But she pushed on. This was the final meeting with Brazitel, the third legacy telecom company. It was the biggest risk. All the pressure points were on the table. Revenue share, data ownership, operational control. And it was supposed to be Sandra's moment to shadow Ruth. But Sandra wasn't there. Ruth had taken a longer route through Cape Lado, so no one could track her in real time. Coratec thought she hadn't arrived yet. She was already deep into negotiations. The CEO, Mr. Mata, grilled her for hours. "How do I know this won't fall apart after 3 months?" he asked. Ruth looked him in the eye. "It won't," she said. "Unless I leave." He stared at her. "So the trust is in you, not the company." Ruth paused, then leaned in. "If there was a way to move forward, same tech, same plan, but without the noise and without the risk, would you be open?" Mr. Mata didn't blink. "You already know the answer to that." The third seed planted and growing. 3 cities, 3 leaders. All said the same thing without saying it directly. Coratec no longer inspired trust. Ruth did. Not the logo. Not the board. She had become the face, the backbone, the bridge between fear and faith. And yet, Coratec saw her only as a name to be erased. But while they sent her across oceans to close deals, she had been quietly opening doors, ones they didn't even know existed. The seeds she planted were no longer whispers. They were roots, stretching beneath the surface. And soon they would rise. The night before her return, Ruth sat alone by the window of her hotel in Kuto town. The city lights reflected on the river like broken gold. The contracts were complete. The numbers were perfect. The trust had been earned. She should have felt pride. Instead, a strange heaviness sat on her chest. She turned on her laptop to review the final documents, but suddenly her session ended. She tried to reconnect. Access denied. Then her company email went blank. Her calendar vanished. Her phone's VPN disconnected. In that quiet hotel room, she had been locked out of everything. And then came the email, cold, sharp, final. Your employment at Coratec is hereby terminated. Effective immediately. She sat still for a full minute. The fan whirred. The room was silent. Then, like a slow echo, the weight settled in. They had erased her while she was still mid-air. No meeting. No thank you. Not even a phone call. Ruth didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just reached for the matte black laptop under her bed, the one Coratec never touched. She opened it. The wallpaper was simple, the folder encrypted. She clicked once, and everything lit up. The real work. Trident notes. The recorded calls. The signed drafts. Not stolen. Secured. Legal had approved the backup months ago for cross-border clarity. It was hers. They thought firing her would silence her. But all they did was cut the rope holding her back. Ruth leaned back in her chair and whispered to herself, "Let's begin." The next morning, the streets of Kuto town looked the same. Motorbikes sped past. Hawkers called out. Life moved. But for Ruth, everything had changed. She took a taxi to the airport without rushing. She didn't need to run anymore. She had her map. She had her mission. And more than anything, she had clarity. The kind that comes after a storm. By the time Ruth landed back in Lagos, the sun was up. Her taxi passed the familiar roads that once led to the Coratec building. But today she didn't stop. Not because she couldn't, but because she no longer needed to. Still, curiosity tugged at her spirit. So she asked the driver to pull over 2 blocks away. She walked the rest of the way on foot. The building looked smaller than she remembered. The same marble floors. The same glass doors. But now something had shifted. Or maybe it was Ruth who had changed. She entered the lobby. The security man, Daniel, stood up in surprise. "Madam Ruth. I wasn't told you'd be coming." She held up her badge. "I wasn't told I wouldn't be." She tapped it on the scanner. Red light. Access denied. Daniel frowned. HR must have updated the system this morning. "I'm really sorry." Ruth didn't argue. She simply nodded. "No problem." The receptionist didn't greet her. The digital sign by the elevator now read, "Strategic Integration, VPS, Emmanuel." Her name was already gone from the building. But she stayed calm. She took the lift anyway. The 15th floor, where she once built dreams from scratch, now felt hollow. The young staff she had trained avoided her eyes. Some stood up and quietly walked to the break room. Her desk was empty. Her framed client letters were missing. Even her office chair had been replaced with a new one, the price tag still attached. On a nearby table, she saw the latest company newsletter. The headline screamed, "Sandra Emanuel to lead global partnership." Ruth flipped through it quickly. Her name was not mentioned once. Not a word about her journey across 3 countries. Not a line about the deals she rescued. Not a breath about the relationships she built with trust and sweat. They had rewritten the story without her. She dropped the newsletter into a bin, turned around and walked away. Outside, the street felt louder. The cars, the wind, the vendors. It all felt sharper. But it didn't shake her. She walked toward the hotel where she used to stay between flights. The staff still recognized her. They welcomed her without questions. They gave her a quiet room on the top floor. No badge. No permissions. Just rest. Inside that hotel room, Ruth allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. She took off her shoes. She sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply exhaled. It wasn't grief. It wasn't loss. It was understanding. The place she gave her best years to had never really seen her. They used her talent, her time, name. And when they were done, they removed her like a file on a shared drive. But Ruth was not a file. She was a force. And now, finally, she was free. She pulled out her other laptop. The one she called Amari. It still held everything. The new portal. Teams' encrypted notes. The private meeting logs. The client handshakes. A dream. She opened her contact list. 3 names stood bold and clear: Luis Mata, Linda Clark, CTO of Telaxis. She wrote only 4 words to each of them. The door is open. And then she closed the laptop. She didn't refresh her inbox. She didn't wait. She knew what was coming. She had planted the seeds. It was only a matter of time before the garden answered. The next morning, she sat by the window of the hotel cafe. Black coffee. A croissant she didn't eat. The world outside moved like it always had. But within the quiet, a storm was shifting. At Coratec, meetings began as usual, except something was missing. There were no updates from the Trident clients. No responses. No check-ins. Mr. Emmanuel made the first call to Telaxis. No answer. He tried again. Nothing. He called the internal strategy team. Sandra was confused. The silence wasn't normal. By midday he called Euroconnect. Linda Clark's number rang 7 times, then voicemail. His panic had just begun. By 11 a.m., confusion had turned into quiet panic. Mr. Emmanuel sent 2 emails to Linda's legal team. Both bounced back. One read, "Out of office." The other read, "For Trident matters, please contact your current liaison." But no one at Coratec knew who that liaison was anymore. At noon they tried Brazitel. Mr. Motta's assistant picked up. "Sorry, sir," she said calmly. "Mr. Motta is unavailable." "Unavailable today?" Mr. Emmanuel asked. "No," she replied. "Unavailable for Coratec." The line went silent before it cut off. Sandra looked at her father, her face pale. "What's going on?" she whispered. He had no answer. Back at her hotel, Ruth refreshed the client dashboard. It was clean, elegant, built by Teo and Joseph. Tracked every login securely. Quietly. No fanfare. No leaks. All 3 clients had already signed into the Amari portal within the last 2 hours. No one had made noise. No one had announced anything. But the shift had begun. Ruth had not stolen anything. She had simply offered something better. And they had chosen. Coratec wasn't being attacked. It was being ignored. And in a company ruled by noise, silence was louder than thunder. By mid-afternoon, Mr. Emmanuel tried a new strategy. He sent his investor relations team to issue a public letter, requesting all 3 clients confirm Coratec's continued leadership in the Trident project. Only one client responded. It was a single sentence. "Coratec no longer speaks for us. Ruth does." That line, simple and clear, traveled faster than fire. Inside the Amari suite, Ruth read it quietly. She didn't cheer. She didn't clap. She just stood by the window and watched the city move beneath her feet. She had not demanded the spotlight. But now the world had turned toward her. Journalists began to call. Not from Lagos alone, but from Cape Lado, Nairobi, even Johannesburg. They had questions. What is Amari? How did it secure all 3 Trident clients? Who is Ruth, and how did she pull this off in silence? She gave no interviews. She had no loud speech to give. But Rahim, her systems architect, arrived later that evening holding a bottle of non-alcoholic champagne and a single printed sheet of paper. "You going to frame this?" he asked with a grin. Ruth looked at the headline. It read, "The Quiet Takeover. Why Coratec is Falling Apart." Ruth didn't smile, not yet. But her eyes glinted with something calm and powerful. "Let them sit in silence a little longer," she said. It wasn't revenge. It was something deeper. Something earned. Later that evening, she received a voice message from a number she hadn't saved. Mr. Emmanuel. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. His voice was steady but tired. "Was this personal?" he asked. Ruth deleted the message before it finished. Because the answer wasn't simple. It was personal. And it was also professional. Strategic. Necessary. And long overdue. The next morning at exactly 9:30 a.m., Amari issued its first public statement. No flashy press release. No social media storm. Just one short announcement through its clean white portal. Amari Group proudly announces a continental strategic partnership with Telaxis, Euroconnect, and Brazitel. The 7-year agreement, valued at 1.7 billion naira, will support secure cloud migration across 3 major regions. Signed, Ruth Aini CO. No backstory. No bitterness. Just clarity. Just truth. By 10 a.m. 3 articles went live. By noon, the name Amari had trended in 4 countries. Trade magazines called it the most graceful shift in African enterprise tech in a decade. Investors took notice. Venture capital emails began flooding the inbox. Raheem smiled as he watched the numbers tick upward. They want to invest, he said. Everyone wants in. But Ruth stayed calm. Not yet, she replied. We're not chasing headlines. We're building roots. She had no interest in noise. She was growing something deeper, something that wouldn't fall when the winds came. Coratec, things collapsed slowly. Sandra shut herself in the boardroom with the communications team, trying to draft a response. Jenna, who still had friends inside the company, messaged Ruth quietly. They're calling it sabotage. They're scrambling to write a counterstory. Ruth didn't reply. There was nothing to say. There had been no sabotage, only decisions. The kind of decisions that companies ignore until they become consequences. The board had gambled with a woman who was a builder, and lost. And now, they were writing statements for an audience that had already walked away. At 1:30 p.m., the most respected business journal in Lagos published a new headline. A new queen rises. Amari's quiet founder claims what Coratec could not keep. There was no interview. Just deep reporting from unnamed sources, quiet observations and proof. Ruth didn't need to explain herself. The work had already spoken. By evening, Sandra Emanuel resigned. Effective immediately. No final speech. No press photo. Just a small line in the industry newsletter. Following a shift in strategy, Vice President Sandra Emanuel has stepped down. No one asked where she went. No one seemed to care. An hour later, another message arrived. This time from the Coratec board. Grayson Emanuel has been removed as CEO by unanimous vote. No press conference. No statement. No fuss. The very same quiet blade they used to remove Ruth had returned to them. Ruth read the notification on her phone while standing in the quiet balcony of Amari's new office. She didn't laugh. She didn't gloat. She just exhaled slowly and whispered to herself, balance has been restored. Because this had never been about revenge. It had always been about reclaiming what should never have been taken. That evening, Ruth walked through the newly finished Amari headquarters. The tall windows caught the light of the setting sun, casting long golden streaks across the polished wooden floors. There were no marble statues. No giant screens. Just quiet energy. Purpose in every corner. On one wall, near the entrance, a simple steel plaque had been mounted. It read, Amari, founded by Ruth Aini. Not in small print. Not hidden in footnotes. No assistant's name placed above hers. For the first time, her name was visible. Unapologetically present. She placed her hand lightly on the plaque and stood still, remembering all the times she was erased. All the times her voice was edited out. This time, she had built something where her name would never be removed. Inside the main boardroom, it didn't feel cold like Coratec's chrome-heavy meeting halls. The walls were warm. The table was round. Conversations flowed freely. Linda Clark sat to her right, flipping through rollout schedules. Mr. Mata was on a video screen making jokes about football. Telexis's CTO had sent a special gift. 3 bonsai trees, one for each region Amari now supported. Ruth sat at the head of the table. But it didn't feel like a throne. Felt like home. Not a place where power ruled, but a place where people were heard. And she no longer needed to raise her voice. The building now spoke for her. Later that night, Ruth stepped onto the rooftop, where the city lights of Lagos blinked below like soft stars. Raheem and Jenna joined her with warm mugs of tea. The air was cool. Jenna held her phone up and said, "Did you see the final client transfer? All done. No press battle. No public scandal. Just quiet exits." Ruth nodded. "Good. So what now?" Behemoth. Ruth turned to face them. Now we build. For real this time. No pretending. No borrowed names. No stolen voices. They clinked mugs not in victory, but in peace. The next morning Ruth opened her inbox. No chaos. Just a single message. It was from a young woman in Nairobi. The email read, "I don't know you, but I watched everything from afar. I'm not in tech. I work in finance. I've had my name removed too. I've been called emotional for speaking up. I've been asked to stay quiet so others can rise. Watching you move with dignity gave me hope. I just wanted to say thank you." Ruth smiled softly, not because she needed validation, but because it reminded her that the work mattered. Not just the contracts, not just the clients, but the why behind the how. She replied with 4 words. "You are not alone. If you have ever had your name deleted from something you gave your whole heart to, if you've ever smiled while someone else took your credit, if you've ever been asked to let it go when what they meant was, let yourself go, then hear this. You are not invisible. You are not too loud. You are not too much. You are a storm waiting for the right sky. Don't chase applause. Don't wait for permission. Build quietly. Move with wisdom. And when the time comes, let your presence speak louder than your pain. Because what you build, when it is rooted in truth, will never need to shout. It will simply stand. And it will be seen.